Welcome, everyone. This is your host, Adam Coleman. And with me today, we have Ann Siegel, who is a psychotherapist and a certified collaborative divorce coach. We're going to talk more about how these roles apply to the divorce process and also dive a little bit deeper into the collaborative divorce arena. So, Ann, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, can you share with us a little bit more about what made you go into divorce coaching originally?
So I've been a psychotherapist actually in private practice for 38 years. And in 2010, decided that I wanted to expand my practice to add something that would hit other populations, and went back to school for executive coaching and thought I would really love that. But it was after doing years and years of therapy and deep work and trauma work, it just seemed a little too surface, though I do some of that too. And a great professor led me into divorce coaching. And so I met a couple of attorneys in Charlotte who I work with regularly. And those attorneys turned me on to the collaborative divorce process. And I've been doing coaching ever since and love it. So that's a side part of my practice that actually has become probably one of the predominant parts of my practice. I now do more coaching and couples work than almost anything else, although I still do some traditional therapy. But I have therapists that work for me as well, so that I can give them new therapy cases and keep the couples cases and coaching cases. Be it collaborative divorce or any type of divorce, I'll work with one party if it's not collaborative, or both parties if it is. So
What's the main difference between divorce coaching and being a therapist? And when should people consider either getting involved?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that's really important to distinguish is that therapy is to help people heal their past. So you're looking at, what did you live through? What have you gone through? What's affected you in your past that affects you today? And in divorce coaching, you're looking at a here forward approach. So though I do a history just so I get a handle on where people have been, what they've been through a little bit, I'm mostly focusing with what are we looking at as our goals and what are we trying to accomplish here. So in coaching, I'm always looking from this point that they came forward into a future vision of what they see, what they want to see, what they want to create. So especially if I work with a collaborative couple, I'm helping them oftentimes go over a parenting plan, which we used to call custody. How do they want that to look? I'm known for creative planning with people. So the traditional one person has a week with children, the other person has a week with children. I will help them come up with a more creative solution if that doesn't really work for them based on scheduling or kids' schedules. We always try to put the children first in collaborative coaching. So I'll try to help them come up with, what do your kids need? What are their activities? What suits them in terms of coming home from school and homework time and weekend time, and what suits the two of you and what best accommodates that. And so I try to work with people on the communication around a lot of that, and holiday planning and communication skills, etc. And I love those pieces.
Do you find that you ever do the therapy work for the same client that you're also doing divorce coaching, or do you try to keep it separate?
I always keep it separate. So if I'm coaching a client or clients, I'm always separating the coaching from the therapy. Now, if I have a therapy case and they're going through something similar, I might help coach them a little bit. And in my therapy cases, I'm often coaching too, because as people heal, you want them to have a future vision. You don't want them to just heal to here and stay stuck. So in my therapy cases, I'm often adding in components of coaching. But in my coaching cases, I'm not helping people heal their past. That's not the goal of coaching. And if people need therapy, I will refer them to somebody to do that component and just do the coaching piece with them.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So it's not like there's an advantage of trying to find someone that does both. In your opinion, it probably makes more sense to have somebody, if they need a therapist, have somebody separate do the therapy side, and then you have the divorce coaching piece as well.
Or if they need my expertise specifically as a therapist, since I'm trained in different modalities, then right. I will refer them for coaching. But it's much more the norm that I will keep the coaching case and refer out the therapy piece. Some people do come back post-coaching and need some healing work around grief or building their own lives, which is still coaching, but I will work with one individual if I have permission from the other for them to come back and work with me in that modality, but I won't do it simultaneously. So if somebody comes in, let's say with a substance abuse issue, I'm not going to work with them on their substance abuse while I'm coaching a couple. I'm going to send them out for that work to somebody else, oftentimes somebody that works for me or a different therapist of some type.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, what does that look like, I guess, in a real world example? Like, how often are you typically meeting with people on the divorce coaching side? Is it weekly, monthly, periodically? How is that set up?
That's a good question. It really depends on the case. Every case is very individualized. I'd say the typical collaborative case, I'm meeting with them every 3 to 4 weeks so that I can initially meet with them maybe a little more often, help build good communication skills. But as they're working through their financial piece, their attorney piece, et cetera, they don't need to meet with me as frequently. And some people want to meet with me more often. Like I have met with couples weekly for a period of 4 to 6 weeks, let's say, or 8 weeks, help them build out their parenting plan, learn good communication, good co-parenting skills, holiday scheduling, and then move them over to the financial piece, the attorney piece, and then they'll come back to me periodically at that point. So it really depends on the case, to be honest.
Specific to the collaborative case, and we'll get into collaborative a little bit more in depth later, but are you strictly meeting with both soon-to-be ex-spouses every single time? Is there ever a situation where you're meeting with one-offs or one individually?
So there are 3 different types of divorce processes. Litigation is the traditional divorce process that we all know, where people went to court, et cetera. And mediation is where each party has a separate attorney and there's a neutral mediator helping the parties with their attorneys negotiate their case. And then there's also arbitration where somebody is really making the decisions at that point after a mediation. Let's say there's an outstanding issue. So in cases that are litigated or mediated, I will only work with one party. I don't work with both. In cases where it is aimed to be collaborative, in collaborative, the parties are learning to negotiate the agreement between them with the attorneys help, but we're all working together as a team. And that's very different. Now, some of those cases end up in mediation at the end or for a small piece. I will still work with the couple at that point, but I don't meet with an individual doing collaborative. I always try to meet with the couple doing collaborative. I'm considered a neutral, and I don't want parties to feel like I've met with the wife or the husband or 2 husbands and meet with them individually, or 2 wives. I don't want people to feel like I'm siding with one person or the other. So I link everybody in on the communication. I link everybody in on the sessions. And then I link the attorneys to the case as well. They sign a release and I will send over whatever we've drafted. I'm trained as a mediator as well, so I have that training to help draft a memorandum of understanding that we've agreed to, which isn't a legal document, but it helps move the process along. And it takes the emotion off the attorney's desks. So they prefer to send them to me, let me deal with the communication and the angst and the anxiety, and then send them forward. So
that's good information. And I guess one issue with the collaborative side is if things don't go successfully with it, they kind of have to go into a different path, maybe a mediation, maybe litigation. Hopefully it doesn't go to that stage. But you said you were able to actually help them, even if the collaborative side didn't work and it had to be canceled out, you're still able to help them afterwards?
I'm reclused out if the collaborative side doesn't work and they go to litigation. At that point, I can't continue to work with them. But if they go to mediation for a small piece, I often can stay on the case. That's in the collaborative agreement we sign. It really depends on the specific case. Most cases that I have worked on that start collaborative end collaborative. It might not be as pretty as we want at the end, but we aim to stay as collaborative as possible through the process, even if there's barriers that we hit along the way. So those cases might take longer, but we try to keep everybody still working together. I've only had maybe a case or 2 end up on mediating a specific issue when it's been collaborative, although I can only think of 1. since the beginning of doing coaching that ended up in mediation. And I didn't stay on the case at that point. At that point, I came off the case. Even in the hardest of cases, the aim is to stay as collaborative as possible and end the case collaboratively as a team. So that's our hope. We all sign an agreement. That agreement says if we go to litigation, then the team has to change. And at that point, I will come off. So,
Right.
But I haven't happen. I've had people come to me one-on-one when they're in a case that's being litigated for coaching on their side, but I won't work with both in those cases.
Do you find that it's more effective when you're going through the collaborative side of things where you're working with both spouses, or do you find that you have more success when it is one-off or one-on-one during mediation or litigation cases?
I actually find it's always more successful with collaborative. I prefer collaborative, and a lot of people come to me first on the front end before attorneys, and I will help them explain the process and help them understand collaborative divorce process, what the agreement looks like, how I work in the process. And then I will recommend attorneys in our group as well for each of them to have collaborative attorneys. So I always prefer collaborative, and I always prefer working with a couple. And I've had some cases where the communication, almost from the beginning, they come in afraid that it's not going to go well, and it goes beautifully after a couple of sessions. And I try to meet with couples for 2 hours the first time, so I can really ease them into learning to communicate through the conflicts. I am trained in something called somatic experiencing, which is unusual in the coaching world. I trained in it when I was doing therapy work, and it helps people understand the sensations in their body that relate to experiences and people and events. So when the anxiety rises up in the room and the conflict starts, I help people take a breath and a pause and stop and talk about what's underneath that. What's the fear that's coming up? So that we can work through that, and couples can both be heard, each individual, and settle that down so the process continues to go more smoothly. And that's been very successful in my coaching. Whereas when the conflict starts, if you can't calm that room, it gets away, I think.
Talked about this before we started recording, but a lot of your sessions are virtual, correct? So even in the collaborative space, is that still the case, or are you actually in the room with both people?
Yes, so it's always virtual, actually. I worked in an office for 35 years, and when COVID hit, continued working until August, and then came home at that point, mostly because my daughter had twins, and if I wanted to see them, I couldn't be in an office seeing other people. And after about 1.5 years, when COVID started to ease a little bit, late 2021, I had an offer to sell my office. And so I polled my clients and said, what do you want to do? I thought Zoom was more effective. And everybody except one person preferred Zoom. So at that point, I sold my office, and I tell couples I only work virtually. I will go to a 5-way meeting in person. So when we have 5 ways, which are the 2 attorneys, the 2 clients, and myself, those are all in person. But all the coaching that I do with the couple alone is virtual. And I have found it to be more effective. People can take a breath a little easier. There's more air in the room. People can go to an individual space. And I actually find that couples counseling is more effective that way too. And 35 years in an office, I've been able to see the difference. And I would say that it's a marked difference to work virtually. I think it's way better.
Interesting. Well, no, I think it works great for a lot of people, and even with their schedules, just from a convenience standpoint, I think that's a huge benefit to have. And we've talked about collaborative on this show several times, but maybe share with us a little bit about how that's different. And then also, because you're so heavily involved in that process, what does it look like? Sequence of events, what is taking place for people that want to go down the collaborative space? Who are they talking to first? What do the meetings look like? How often are they meeting? Things like that, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. So it depends on the case. So I do get cases that come to me pro se, which is without attorneys, oftentimes. And I will work with them to explain the collaborative process. And what that involves is they'll meet with me the first time. I'll explain to them my role, which is communication, parenting plans, co-parenting, helping them work through conflict, grief, anxiety. I do a lot of work with what I call future visioning, where I help them really learn how to vision what they want to see in the future. We always put the children first. We talk about that. And then I explain the collaborative agreement. So after they meet with me, they'll choose attorneys oftentimes if they want to. Either way, they will sign what's called a collaborative agreement. And that agreement says that we are all agreeing to have full disclosure, be open about the process, be open about everything that is produced, et cetera, information-wise, material-wise, and that any attorneys use will also be in the collaborative process. And many times then at that point, one or both will choose an attorney and they will meet with the attorney and then come back to me and we'll get that process where we'll all meet as a five-way, sign the agreement, or we'll do it virtually, which I've done as well, and really talk about what are the steps here? What's the flow? What does this look like? What do the attorneys need? How many meetings do they need with me roughly? And what are we looking at as the goals? And then from there, I am the communicator and liaison often between the couple and sort of running the flow of the process. So each time I meet with them, or every 2 times, I will set up a meeting with the attorneys as well with the release signed and fill them in on where we're at, what I'm seeing as possibilities that are problems or issues, or how smooth the flow is going in terms of that. And also run by anything, like I type agreements all the time. And those, once I have a release after the couple's edited it, made changes, reviewed it, it goes over to the attorneys for them to do the same. And then they'll send me feedback if need be. And we'll set up a call if need be to discuss pieces as well. And then they're working with sometimes a financial advisor on the financial piece, sometimes not. It depends on how complicated the case. And then the attorneys on the legal pieces, and eventually we'll all meet, put it all together, and the attorneys will draft the final legal agreement. So that's the flow. I do something different as well with couples that I work with that are collaborative. I encourage them to do a closing ceremony that I've developed, that I learned through the collaborative training and then sort of edited myself, where they come in and we talk about hopes and dreams for the other person and what they've taken from their relationship and how to use that going forward and what they've learned from this process, and basically just to close up and chapter the process. And then talk about next steps. Does anybody feel like they need more coaching? What else does the couple feel like they need? And then I'm available. I've had couples come back and say, we need to navigate a school decision or a religious decision, or can you help us, even though our agreement is done? And I will help them work through those types of issues as well.
How long does the process typically take from what you've seen?
Oh, it depends. I've seen as short as 6 months to a year, and as long as years. It's so varied. It depends on the financial situation. I have done a pro se agreement in 2 or 3 meetings without attorneys that is simple, where they go and use their own table and come up with their own decision on child support, spousal support, et cetera. And I just do the parenting plan, and they have me draft an agreement, and they either take it to an attorney and have it put into a legal document. I had a couple do it where they both notarized it and had already agreed to these things for 10 years, but wanted to get it into writing and didn't want to involve the legal process, and went forward that way. So I've seen everything. I've seen all types of cases.
And you mentioned several of the key components. Obviously, legal side, attorney is standard. You've got the financial side with CDFA or Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. You've got the emotional side, which obviously you're discussing. Are there any other key components to that divorce team that you recommend people get involved?
Sometimes we'll use a child specialist if there are children that really are having issues going through the process, but that's more for the children and the parents than it's often included in the team sometimes. And if we need recommendations from the child specialist, they'll sometimes come to the meetings or at least make recommendations beforehand. I have a case where I've worked on helping somebody get parenting rights back. And so we did involve a child specialist, and we've consulted with them, and I've met with the person multiple times and made recommendations, and they now have parenting time, which has been amazing and really great for everybody. It's worked out really, really well. That was a very different case for me. That's a case that I only work with one party because it's a case that was in litigation. But that's been a very successful feeling to help somebody be able to get parenting back and learn the skills and do really, really well with that. So sometimes a child specialist and then a financial planner if the financial issues especially are complicated, or if they want to take the attorneys out of that piece to start with a financial planner and then bring it back to the attorneys or loop them in. I will say, back to the question about how long, no matter what we recommend as a team or I recommend, I tell people, don't rush. Like, this is not a rush case. Let's try to take our time, make sure we cross all the T's and dot all the I's and make sure things are in place the way it's really going to work longer term. Sometimes we'll put in to review the agreement in a year before it's finalized, or even after sometimes. And same thing with the attorneys. We all believe, let's take our time here and make sure things are done in a way that will help everybody going forward. So that's really what I've seen. And then in the meetings, they're often 5-way. So you include a coach to run the flow of the meeting, and sometimes 4-way. Sometimes I'm not needed to do that, and they're just working on financial pieces. But given that I'm doing the communication piece and keeping the calm in the room, a lot of times I will go to the meeting just to continue that process.
You said most of those are in person, or are those ever allowed to be virtual as well?
We've had some virtual. We had one where it was set up to be in person and somebody got sick and we ended up doing it virtually. We've even signed their agreement virtually. So we've had a couple that are virtual, but those are better, in my opinion, in person, because you've worked virtually. And this way the team gets to meet in person. The couple gets to meet each member, including the attorneys that they've sometimes already met in person, and the attorneys are meeting the other party, et cetera. So I think at least having a meeting where we sign or meet initially or somewhere along the process is very helpful in person.
And you said you're often the first person that gets involved in the collaborative place. It's not the attorneys, it's often you.
Depends on the case. There's lots of cases that come from attorneys, and I love those cases because they can brief me a little bit with a release, and I already know what's coming going in. But I do have couples I've worked with send other couples, and they'll often come to me first and ask for recommendations. And I've had many cases where the party comes and one person has seen an attorney but not both, and they're afraid that it will get contentious, so they come to me to help navigate that. And then eventually the other person usually loops in an attorney at some point.
Any advice for somebody starting down that path, whether they're thinking collaborative or they're not sure which path they should go? Any early level advice for those people?
Definitely. I always recommend collaborative. If a couple can do it, you're going to have the best interests of the children and each party in a collaborative case. And you get to make your own decisions. When you walk into a court, you have a judge making the decisions. When you walk into mediation, yes, you're making the decisions, but a mediator is the person going back and forth. Arbitration, somebody else is making your decisions. In collaborative, the couple is making the decisions, and they're making them primarily on behalf of minor children first, if there are minor children, and then on behalf of themselves and hopefully each other. And that's the goal. How can it be win-win for each through a very difficult process? Divorce is not easy for anybody. Even if you're the person who wants the divorce, it's not easy. And I help people understand there's going to be grief around hopes and dreams. There's going to be emotional pieces. And I think cases where people can loop in a coach go so much smoother. And I think most attorneys would agree with that. But I would absolutely always recommend collaborative before anything else if a couple can do it. So,
are there any situations, any obvious ones where collaborative just wouldn't work for them?
Domestic violence cases, abuse cases, usually collaborative is not as much of an option, if at all, depending on the level of abuse. Cases where one party doesn't want to participate in collaborative, obviously. But in my opinion, I've worked with so many couples over the years, and my belief is if you're both willing to come to the table, I can help you learn to communicate. It may be hard and you may not like parts of it, but I can help you learn a negotiated process. So I teach couples that there are 4 types of relationships: forcing, where one person makes the decisions; accommodating, where one person is always accommodating what the other person needs or wants and not themselves; compromising, which most people would think would be the healthiest, where you come up with person A wants a plan, person B wants a plan, you come up with C. But negotiating is what's really healthy, which is if you want A and somebody else wants B, how do you do both? And that's how I work with couples. You want this, you want this. How can we do both? And sometimes they'll say, well, we can't. And I'll say, I bet you can. Let's talk about creative ways to do both. And that works the best, in my opinion. And so couples haven't been in that type of a relationship. And so I'm teaching them, all right, so you come in at this place where you've been accommodating or forcing, or one person's been making decisions. How do we negotiate so you can both get your needs and wants met through this process, and the children's first? So that's the goal.
You and I are both in Charlotte, but are you able to help people outside of the region? I know a lot of the collaborative stuff is very regionalized, but from the coaching standpoint, can you help pretty much anywhere?
Yes, pretty much. I can help anywhere. I've worked with people all over, and I don't know the laws of the other places, but I'm not giving legal advice anyway.
Right.
So that's really up to the attorneys, and whether I'm in Charlotte or whether I'm working with a case in New York or DC or anywhere else. Coaching is really about negotiation and communication and parenting plans and holidays. And I don't know that changes really. It changes from family to family. Different families have different holidays that are important, different holiday traditions that are important. We try to keep those in place. How do we honor those and help them come to an agreement? But I don't think that the state really matters where they live. And so, yes, I can help couples in other areas as well.
Outside of the standard misconception that attorneys are really the only ones getting involved in the divorce process, I guess the next concern would be from a cost standpoint. So some people, I think, have this concept that it's going to cost more by bringing in all these other third parties as opposed to just having the attorney handle it. And can you maybe speak to that?
Yes, absolutely. So I don't think that that's true, that in fact, it's going to be more expensive with more team members, because you're spending attorney money on doing pieces that are not attorney expertise, emotional issues, communication, etc. If you do that with a coach, you're going to get those pieces taken care of, and you don't have to use the attorneys for those pieces. So then you're doing the legal pieces with the attorneys where it belongs, and you're doing the emotional pieces with a coach where that really belongs. And that's my expertise and other coaches' expertise usually, especially with a therapy background of 30 plus years. I've been working on communication with people my whole career. And so I think they actually spend less money and find that the process is a lot smoother when you loop in a coach versus just going to attorneys for the whole process. So I think people have fears about that. And I try to help them understand, if you do these pieces, then when you get to your attorneys, those pieces are done. And they will help you decide if that works 100% before it goes into the legal document. But you've already talked about all that, thought about all that, had time to process that. And so, in fact, I think it actually makes the divorce process faster, smoother, easier, and less expensive.
Yeah, I agree. I think that same logic holds true with pretty much any of the people that specialize in this, me included, financial advisors. You don't want your attorney trying to charge you legal hourly wages for financial advice. That's just not what their expertise in. Same with coaching, emotional side obviously is the same way. So bringing the specialists is going to make the process so much easier and smoother when you have people that are just solely focused on divorce specific expertise of mortgage, of finance, of emotional coaching. So no, I think that's great advice. Any other final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with today related to the divorce process?
Just that I'm thrilled to be able to do this interview, and I'm glad you're doing these podcasts and interviews, because I think people really need this information and need to understand better what collaborative is, what coaching is, etc. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, it was great having you. If somebody would like to learn more information about you and the services that you offer, what's the best way to research you?
So I have a website, which is gently-transition.com. And the fastest way to reach me is either by email or text message, because I work, the days that I work from 8 in the morning till 6 in the evening. And it's pretty busy because I'm focused on my clients. But if somebody messages me or emails me, I will always get back to them. And I have a direct email as well, which stands for, it's the initials to New Beginning Intensive Outpatient Program. So it's NBIOP0304 @Yahoo. And that's the fastest way to email me. And then my phone number is 704-491-5273. And anybody can text me for information or for a consult, and I'm happy to do that.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure I include all that in the description as well. If anybody wants to reach out, I would highly advise it. So I think it's a great first step is to get the divorce coach involved first. So definitely appreciate you taking the time. It's been great advice.
Thank you. And if people look for me, it's going to come up under Ann Kreindler-Siegel. So that's the professional name that I use, the hyphenated last name. So they'll find that on my website. And also if they Google me to find information in the collaborative divorce process. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you.